So I've noticed something in comics. There's an awful lot of smart folks wearing spandex and masks and mechanized armor, isn't there? From Iron Man to Ant-Man, The Flash to the Atom, and more, American comics are filled with folks who have spent a lot of time in academia and then start fighting crime. Honestly, there are so many, it's a bit ridiculous. Let me just name the ones I can think of off the top of my head. Hold on. Ant-Man, Iron Man, Batman, The Flash, Mr. Fantastic, Doctor Doom, Mr. Terrific, Dr. Midnight. This is a bit to illustrate how many there are. It's less important to know all of them, but to just see how many can easily be named. I'll be at this for a while, so we can just move on from this point. There's the professor from Challengers of the Unknown. Some of you watching this video might be saying, but John, this isn't news. They've been there since the very beginning, just like those pictures you showed, which clearly weren't contemporary comics or movies. To which I say, hey, this is a video, and you have no way of actually communicating with me. But that is a good point. They have been there since the very beginning. Maybe not in such robust forms, but certainly Smarties have been integral to comics DNA. Looking back at the golden age of comics, we can pinpoint one everybody's likely to have heard of due to his absolutely massive library of movies and media. Batman. He's got the car, he's got the gadgets, he's got the plane, he's got guns. Alright, let's just ignore him shooting the vampire that was also a werewolf here. Alright, it was the golden age, it was a different time. A car and plane and gadgets all signify that Bruce Wayne, alias Batman, is the one making all these things in secret. Or at the very least, it insinuates that he has enough money to buy base models of these things and batify them accordingly. That tells us, the reader, that he's a smart man who is capable of fabrication, aviation engineering, and automobile construction. Not bad for someone in the 1930s. And this all just makes sense for 1930s comics because the aim was not to sell a believable story grounded in reality, but to sell a fantasy to customers who will buy more because it's entertaining. A lot of comics in this era have that mindset, focusing on the hero having some kind of solution to the problem, regardless of whether or not it's believable that they would have the know-how to do so. Take Wesley Dodds, the Sandman, from the same time period. He's a steel magnate from Long Island who just happens to understand how to make a gun that shoots knockout gas because his name is the Sandman? There's no other reason for this to make sense other than the gimmick, so he just knows how to do it. He took his shirt off earlier to swim aboard this boat, that's why he's shirtless in these panels. As the industry shifts and goes through many changes, we continue to see this trend into the 50s and 60s, the Silver Age of comics. I'll give you two examples of characters from the big two, Marvel and DC, to show you that this isn't something that's isolated. Adam Strange, an archaeologist from Earth who is transported to the faraway planet of Rann via Zeta beam radiation. While there, he and his love Alana battle foes seeking to destroy the city of Ranagar with his jetpack skills. Here's him making fuel for a teleporter, I think? Why would he even know how to do that? Seriously, what ancient human civilization could Adam Strange have studied to give him the knowledge to synthesize fuel out of sediment? Due to his reputation as an archaeologist, that's not how this works. You can't just walk into any lab and flash your degree and just be like, it's cool, I'm a philosophy major, and then they just let you play with chemicals. There's like rules to this. What? Okay. How about Hank Pym? Scientist of vague focus? And apparently also not well respected by his peers. He creates a formula that allows him to shrink and grow things, but is also able to fabricate a supersuit that allows him to shrink and communicate with ants? What? I mean, I'll give him a bit of a pass because he studies ants for a bit, but why would he have the engineering knowledge for the rest of it? Like, some of that also has to have some computer programming skill. We just know that the level of programming necessary for that in the 1960s was considered extraordinary, so he knows that too, I guess. My co-host Matthew on my podcast coined a term that has never left my head since he came up with it to describe this phenomenon. We call them Swiss Army scientists, characters who have some background in a field of science or academia that gives the writer an excuse or justification for letting them do all science, or capital S science. I'm not bringing all this up to poke holes in the imaginary world of strange fantasy that is comics. I understand there is a level of suspension of disbelief going on here to have fun and enjoy the stories, much like you suspend your disbelief when reading The Lord of the Rings and hearing about a Balrog and magic. That's not what this is. What this is me wanting to talk about the nuance of Swiss Army scientists and how there is a missed opportunity in limiting the knowledge a character has to create a richer, more interesting story. Let's look at Batman again. With a character like him, there is a level of fantastic acceptance that goes into reading his stories. Not only can one man do mechanical engineering to create all his gadgets and vehicles, but he can also do construction to make the Batcave, forensic science, martial arts, and more! In the early days of his comics, we're talking from the 30s to the 60s or so, it's really never defined what his exact level of knowledge is. The reader fills in the gaps with their minds as they continue to read his stories and see him do all manner of amazing things, and it makes the mystery of how he knows these things, or where he learned them, part of his aesthetic. When we begin to define the knowledge he possesses, we start to run into boundaries of our imagination because we have some real-world understanding of education and how long it takes to accrue that skill and information. Let's put it this way. Gold and Silver Age Batman comics were like playing in a field as a kid. You could go anywhere, do anything, as long as you imagined it, because the boundaries were what you could come up with in your brain. Sure, you had to do a lot of work to convince yourself or others that what was going on was plausible or happening at all, but if you were all operating on the same make-believe principle, that was fine. It's basically rule of cool. Whatever thing is cool that you want to happen, happens, without taking into account the why. The more we define Batman's abilities, it's less of playing in a field and more of playing on a jungle gym. There are defined parameters and boundaries to your play, maybe even some props or toys, but you eventually run into problems doing certain things you would do on the field that you can't do on the jungle gym. It's hard to sprint when you only have so much room to do it on, or if the thing looks like a pirate ship, you can call it a castle, but you have to do a little work in your imagination to see past that. The jungle gym in this example is the defining of Batman's skills. Look, here's the DC database, a fandom wiki that is relatively well researched, and this is just a portion of the list of things he's able to do, or knows how to do, or has knowledge in. It takes years to amass this level of knowledge and skill. I'm not saying that he can't learn these things, or shouldn't be able to study them, but becoming a master at them is a time-consuming endeavor. Learning, let alone mastering, any of these martial arts listed is really difficult, and if my Duolingo streak tells me anything, it's that time and patience is required to become fluent in any language. When you call those things out, we can't help but think about them as the reader and question if he can really do that. I'm sorry, we're just going to speed up to this bit here. What's that? What's that say right there? He's skilled at guitar? Of course he is. Of course Bruce Wayne is good at guitar. I bet you money like he plays The Cure, like he has serenaded a girl with Boys Don't Cry before. I 1000% just absolutely bet that. Anyway, let's look at a jungle gym example that really works. The Flash. Barry Allen is a forensic scientist for the police department, and because of that, he knows physics, biology, chemistry, and probably a little engineering. Maybe not a lot, but enough to solve a crime. When I see him science his way through something, I can believe it because to have that job, he would have that knowledge. What's more, his super speed allows him to accumulate that knowledge faster than a normal person, but he still has to learn it, and I see him learn it, so I believe it. There are clear boundaries to his knowledge, and in order to get more, we see him get it. Is it a cop-out that his powers allow that to happen almost instantaneously? Yeah, of course. But that's where the fantasy suspension of disbelief comes in, and at this point, you're already reading a book about a man who can move faster than the speed of light. Is the reading really the thing that bothers you? This all ties back to the Swiss Army scientist idea, specifically to say that it can be done. There is a way to do it that doesn't trigger our suspension of disbelief alarms, and we just go with the flow. My belief is that the open field method of writing a Swiss Army scientist is the way to go. Leave it up to the reader to fill in the gap, let them speculate, and make the knowledge that much more impressive. All the while, you can have your crazy, insane, smart person kick butt and take names for as long as you want without anyone asking any annoying logic questions. On the other hand, if you really want to make a character that has defined knowledge, I also have an idea for you. Let's take Adam Strange as an example. For Adam Strange, a human archaeologist, he's a little out of place on a futuristic planet with history he's unfamiliar with. But the concept that no matter where you go, some universal truths about people's behavior are the same could play to his strength. Maybe something on Ran reminds him of a historic event in history that he can try and replicate. Say Ran is under attack from a foreign enemy that tends to push hard with their strongest men in the middle. Ran needs to outsmart them. Adam Strange recalls Hannibal's strategy at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, and the method he used to encircle his opponents by drawing the strongest troops in and surrounding them. Now, he can partake in the fight and do all sorts of heroic things there, and we've leaned on his knowledge of history to win the day. Not only that, but we've learned something. Or how about Ant-Man? Say there's a breach in something small that he needs to plug up, like a hole in a boat or in a room that's losing oxygen. Ant-Man recalls that turtle ants use their bodies to seal the entrance to their colonies and uses his own shrunken down body to seal the hole. With his head? With his butt? Who knows? You get to decide, Marvel. We all know which one we want you to do, you cowards. The end result here is that, again, we have learned something and the character flexes his specific knowledge. The Jungle Gym method of Swiss Army scientist also poses an interesting opportunity for friends and colleagues to come into play for that character. Ant-Man wants to build a new part of his helmet to communicate with ants in a specific way? Call up Iron Man to help. Adam Strange needs some chemistry know-how to accomplish something from the past? Phone your friend Flash. These examples work in worlds like DC and Marvel because of the propensity of smarty pants people. But if you don't want to use another superhero, just invent a scientist to replace them. It creates a richer world and cast for you to continue to utilize, a character who has limitations, which is more believable, and more avenues for the story to explore. There's an issue of Flash from the Silver Age, number 157, where he's battling the Top, and he needs to disguise himself, but he doesn't know how to do stage makeup, so he goes to an actor who he helped get a job at the Flash Museum in a previous issue. This actor helps him do the makeup he needs, and Flash uses that to trick the Top into thinking his invention has turned Flash into an old man, so Flash can take him by surprise. This is what I'm talking about. Flash's knowledge is still massive, but he requires help, and having a cast around him to do that deepens the world and makes paying attention to who comes and goes in the plot a rewarding experience for the reader. With all these positives, I will now also show a thorn for this rose and talk about the dark side of a world full of Swiss Army scientists. What started as a method for early comics writers to have their protagonists win the day by hand-waving their knowledge has evolved into dozens, if not hundreds of characters who are so smart that a superintelligence is no longer impressive. To quote one of my favorite villains of all time, when everyone's super, no one will be. A superintelligence is almost a gimme power nowadays in superhero comics, similar to flying or super strength. I mean, think about it. Batman's really smart, but if he runs into some kind of scientific problem he needs to solve, why does he really need to do research himself when he knows people like Flash, Firestorm, the Atom, Dr. Midnight, and etc.? And if he doesn't, are we saying that this problem could only be solved by Batman and that those other people's intelligence are so far below him, despite us knowing that they're super intelligent, that Batman's more intelligent than them? Do we need an intelligence ranking system? Spoiler, Marvel has that because there are so many super scientists in their world that it is a canon thing that they all have a ranking. Again though, this is a problem that comes into play with companies like DC and Marvel because they have such extensive shared universes that it's impossible to throw a test tube and not hit a super nerd somewhere in the world. If all of this resonates with you or is inspiring to you, might I make a suggestion for writing your own Swiss Army scientist? Really think about the reason your Swiss Army scientist needs to be one. Do you want to do it for the same reasons Gold and Silver Age writers wanted to do it? For the ease of plot and simplicity of solution? That's fine, but maybe make your Swiss Army scientist the only one in your world. Or perhaps think of the Jungle Gym method to give them a ceiling and an expansive cast of other specialized scientists, which makes everyone's knowledge have value. Heck, is it not that serious and you just want to have a character who knows everything for the sake of the pure enjoyment of the comic? That's fine too. Like Denny O'Neil said in the DC Comics Guide to Writing Comics, there is no one correct way of writing comics. The fantasy of a super smarty beating bad guys with their brain and sometimes brawn is a tried and true narrative, as old as literature itself. Heck, if we want to get real technical about it, Odysseus might be the first example of a Swiss Army scientist character in all of fiction, and I kind of love that for Homer. But with centuries of literary hindsight, we can evolve and refine this character archetype and come up with ones that are even more nuanced and entertaining. I believe in you, dear viewer. Go out there and write the next super nerd. I'm excited to read about them.